Everyone who considers Christianity brings heartfelt questions and intellectual objections born out of real-life experiences. They're looking for answers, but even more, they're looking for a safe place to ask their questions. Join me as I meet with a group of people who don't believe in the Christian faith to discuss 6 of the most common objections to Christianity. Welcome to The Reason for God. So, welcome back for our third discussion together on the reason for God. We're talking about issues that make Christianity untenable for many, many people. And our topic for tonight, let me read it, sounds like this. What gives you the right to tell me how to live my life? Why are there so many rules? Let me flesh that out. Christianity is often seen as an enemy of freedom, of authentic personhood, social cohesion, because it appears that Christians are telling everybody else how they ought to live their lives instead of giving them the right to decide what is right or wrong for them. There was a philosopher, Diderot, who had a very quaint little saying. He said, "There will be no freedom until the last king is strangled on the entrails of the last priest." And I'm hoping nobody here takes that literally, for my own sake, but he's saying it in a very startling way, but his main point is that religion is as much an enemy of freedom as totalitarianism. See, in other words, a king is as bad as a priest. What do you think? I mean, I know that's overstatement, but do you think that Christian moral claims are an impediment to freedom? What do you think?
No, because a king has absolute power when a priest has barriers to power.
I think my problem is, like, I'm not exactly sure what freedom means. This sounds like an Eddie question, but I think it's difficult for me to understand what the rules actually are.
Isn't that what psychotherapy is about, though? Breaking rules that we've made for ourselves that are unsuccessful. We ask ourselves why our life isn't working out.
And just to add on that, it seems like a lot of it is actually just human interpretation. Like, what is actually solid foundation, what the actual beliefs are, and what is interpretation by, I guess, humans as to what they actually think it is. So it comes down to that, I think.
Yeah, but I think his original question is, like, who tells you how to live your life? And with the Constitution as, like, a government, whether it's a king or a president, it's something that can be changed, something that people can express their need to be amended. And with the Bible, there's really not that option. I feel like everybody has rules, and I believe that whether your parents give them to you, or a pastor or a priest or a teacher or a babysitter or a brother or a sister or an employer, everybody will give you rules. But it doesn't matter. If the only way that you will follow those rules is if you respect the person that's giving them to you.
This question is very interesting. The question is, who gives you the right to tell me how to live my life, and why are there so many rules? I think we're talking about within a Christian framework, and I think I'd like to sort of go up in altitude a little bit, because I think that's a good sort of question that, you know, someone who's not of the faith can talk about. I believe there are, every moment in our life, we're following someone's rules, period. It's not sort of biblical. We follow parent rules, we follow economic policy. Those are ways that rules are enforced. So we can't really escape it. It's just a matter of being conscious of knowing whose rules we're following. And then that said, I think structure or rules, I sort of equate the two, are necessary for freedom. I think there's actually, we can have, it's called an abyss of liberty, where there's too much freedom, and then you become paralyzed because there's too many options. So I think freedom and rules actually are one and the same. I think you need both. You can't have one without the other.
Actually, I think Eddie's made two statements. I'd love to hear you out on with them. The first one is that everybody does have rules. Everybody does make a decision about what is right and wrong, and then you feel like you ought to follow them. They are rules for you. And you feel a sense of obligation, and you can't just shrug them off. And so you, I think, are saying that it's not just Christians, and it's not even just religious people, but actually everybody comes up with a decision about what is right and what is wrong, feels obligated, and therefore everybody's working off rules.
Yeah. and I think they exist. Whether they're explicit or not
Yes.
is another question.
What do you
so-
rest of you think?
All rules are self-imposed at some level. I mean, you have to take responsibility for what you're going to follow. But of all the things that Eddie was saying, even going to sleep, we have to follow these things that are self-generated.
And not just self-generated. I mean, I've got young kids, so we're busy imposing rules every day.
That's right. That's right.
And the rules are empowering in the sense of if they didn't follow the rules, for example, they wouldn't have friends. You know, if they didn't follow the rules, they wouldn't be able to go to school. If they didn't follow the rules, they wouldn't be able to go out by themselves, basically. So we're teaching them rules that help them. So now a lot of what we're teaching them is borrowed from the Bible. Even if we're not, Christians, it's still borrowed from the Bible. It's in relationship to the Constitution. It's in relationship to a lot of other unspoken rules or socialization. One of the things is when you talk to somebody, you look in their eye. I'm not sure it's in the Bible, but it's in sort of the sort of cultural thing that we teach them, basically.
Within your culture, though.
Within our culture,
That's
exactly.
actually not in my culture. It's
Yeah.
actually
I know.
threatening to look in the eye a little bit. Actually.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I think I resist that, the idea that there is some higher authority that knows everything. I don't necessarily resist the idea that there are rules that I can follow or should follow or would be better for me to follow. I have a lot of trouble, however, with the idea that they are written down somewhere, that they are, in a book that's 2,000 years old or however many thousand years old it is, and that it's sort of doing that or damnation, that kind of thing.
I think life at every moment presents us with these moments that we sort of start creating rules, or we articulate rules around something like thou shalt not kill thy neighbor or covet thy neighbor's wife, or a lot of neighbor stuff. And then what happens is they become sort of, we have to transfer these best learning practices, best life practices to our children, and then they become, rules. They become very short, simple rules. And I think that's what happens. And in the Bible, I think, was a moment in time where instead of just sort of passing it down to your children, we decided to make an attempt to codify it in stories and such. And there are a lot of other religions that have done the same. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think the meeting point is about rules and structure and religion come together.
An example I often like to use is if I eat whatever I want to eat, then I will have terrible health and maybe die in my 40s from a heart attack. If I restrict myself because my body needs certain kinds of food, that is, I'm limiting myself, and even though it's hard in the short run, in the long run, I thrive and I live a longer time and I can do more things. Or exercise. In exercise, I don't like to do exercise because it's very hard work, but in the long run, if I do it, I feel better. And so would it not be therefore the case that morally, it's hard to forgive, it's hard to sometimes show respect when you don't want to, it's hard to refrain from certain things, but in the long run, there's more freedom if we refrain. And therefore, by limiting yourself and submitting to some rules, it actually creates freedom instead of diminishing it.
There's certain rules associated with Christianity that I don't object to. I think they're beneficial. Most of the 10 Commandments, I think, fall into that category. I think what I'm primarily concerned with and really curious about are the rules that are served to ostracize others and to demonize others.
I think the deepest value being honored in all of this is still the value of reciprocity. I mean, that's kind of where it all comes from. Like if all of us have it, because if we didn't, there would be no morality or
Fairness,
rules. If you don't
justice.
believe that we all should have the similar rules apply to us, none of this works. So we all kind of come from there, and therefore, like a genocide notion won't work because, we don't want it done on us, so we're not going to do it onto them.
Right.
That's sort of the foundation for me.
But you would say it's wrong, not just impractical. Genocide.
Yeah,
But
maybe your point. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Our passion with following that might come from some underlying feeling of sacredness. I mean, it's just not that it is, the reciprocity. I have to experience some form of genocide to form an opinion about it. I have this overwhelmingly passionate feeling that any life should be protected if I can step in.
Right.
And where did that come from? I don't know where that comes from. I think it's impossible to avoid not observing rules in any part of your life. Stravinsky, who's a huge influence on me, always said that he felt most free when he had rules in his own life. I think that if there are rules, at some point, no matter what anyone says, we end up adopting them as our own. So I don't really know if I believe in externally imposed rules.
So I had a question. What is the Christian view of homosexuality?
There's three things that Christians say, I think, that have to do with homosexuality. First of all, the Good Samaritan parable, and the very model of Jesus dying for people who were opposing him, means that all Christians are duty-bound to love and serve their neighbors, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of whether they're people of other faiths, people with different views of sexuality. We are supposed to make this city a great place for everybody to live in regardless of their beliefs. That's important. In other words, we have to love people regardless of where they are on that spectrum of belief. Secondly, the gospel of Christianity, which is that you're saved not by good doctrine, not by your good works, but by sheer unmerited grace. It pulls out the self-righteousness and the superiority that tends to go along with religious belief, which has actually made a lot of gay people suffer. A lot of gay people have suffered under that kind of attitude, and I think the gospel takes that away from us, and that is good for gay people. Thirdly, when the Bible tells us something about how we should live, like sex, money, power, it always does it like this. It says, God created us, and therefore God in His Word in the Bible is giving you directions for how you should live in accord with your own design. It's not busy work. It's like when the owner's manual comes to a car, it says, change the oil every so many thousand miles. It's not busy work. It's saying that's how the car was designed. If you violate that, you're actually hurting the car. So the Bible does say sex is for a man and a woman inside marriage to nurture love and commitment in a long-term permanent relationship of marriage, which means polygamy, it means sex outside marriage, and it means homosexuality are considered violations of God's will, but also violations of our own design. So the Bible is actually saying you're missing out if you do those things. So the Christian view of homosexuality is you're going against your own design and you're actually missing out on God's best for you.
I believe there's some rules or stories that basically object or think that homosexuality is a sin. I think that might be a rule in spirit, was trying to be helpful, but I think played out in contemporary society can be very problematic. More problematic in the sense that because it's stated in the Bible, discussion ends about it. It's just that's what the Bible says. And I think that is the more damaging dynamic that results from Bible rules, I would say.
Let me make a proposal. One of the problems I think that we often run into is that from the outside, that is, if you're not a kind of an inside Christian believer, it's a little hard to understand how rules actually function inside Christian faith. They actually don't operate the same way that rules and moral rules operate in other philosophical systems and religious systems like this. Traditional religion says, if I obey the rules, then God accepts me. Whereas Christianity says that because I believe in Christ, who has done everything for me, He's died in my place and so on, I'm accepted, and therefore I obey the rules. Okay, so one approach is, I obey the rules, then God accepts me. The Christian idea is, even though I'm not good enough, God has saved me, He's forgiven me through Jesus, and therefore I'm accepted, and then I obey the rules. God accepts me because of Jesus, when I believe in Him, and then I obey the rules. Now think about this, how different this is. Two people, a religious person in this sense and a Christian, could be sitting there next to each other. They both could be giving their money to the poor, telling the truth, raising their children, doing this, but for totally different reasons. Because the religious person is doing it largely in order to get something from God, and also, if he's doing it, he feels pretty good about it, like, hey, I'm a pretty good person. A Christian person is doing it just to find a way to love the God who saved him. And so, for Christians, the rules is not at the center. For a more traditional religious person, the rules are the center. It's what makes me what I am. To me, that difference is enormous. I wouldn't even be a minister if I didn't believe in that difference. And I do everything I can to pull people off of the first approach to rules into the second approach. Now, is that clarifying to you? Does that help in any way?
Just throw out something that to help me understand. I'm trying to understand the dichotomy that you presented. In a sense, what I'm hearing is acceptance of Jesus and God within the Christian paradigm that you've articulated is tantamount to the love that a parent has for the child. It's unconditional. It's just there. The child doesn't have to work through its lifetime to earn it. It's just there.
Right.
Versus a love that a friend could have for another friend, where in some senses you have to earn it, you can fall in and out of it.
Yes.
But it's just there, it's done, and then the idea is if that's the mentality, the mindset, the space, the actions will follow accordingly, but you just never lose that. It's just there.
Occasionally, God is
Okay.
called a friend, but usually he's called Father.
I can understand that.
I don't like rules where I'm just told to do something because. So like, I actually experienced this a lot growing up, where say my parents would be like, "Do this," like they would order me to like, "You have to go clean your room." I would say, "Why?" Because I said so. And that kind of circular reasoning for me just it doesn't hit home. I really need a logical reason for doing this. Like if they had explained the reason why I should clean my room, like okay, well, it's more hygienic. It's a good habit to develop. If you ever want a girlfriend or anything, you're going to need a clean room. All those things, like the meaning behind it is important to me. I think at one point in my life, I was much more stubborn also at acknowledging the need for rules. I hated being told to do something, but I think at this point in my life, I've come to shed that stubborn shell that I developed over time. So I do think a level of rules, and some rules are needed and are good, but it just depends on the context of the rule.
Let me wrap up like this, maybe to help you understand how I see rules working in a Christian life. When I was falling in love with my wife, Kathy, I actually did research. I talked to her friends. I did everything I could to find out what she liked and what she didn't like. And then I did it, or didn't do it. And when I look back on it, that was obviously, I was making all these changes, and people saw that, but it was love, and it didn't even feel like obedience. And if you already love somebody and you feel loved, then you want to please them, and in a sense, you're making changes, but it doesn't even feel like rules. It's just an instrument for pleasing the loved one. Now, that's how it starts. Having been married a long time, I want you to know that as you get out into the middle of marriage and you're limiting yourself, you're trying to please the other person, it gets really hard unless the other person also limits herself, unless she's doing the very, very same thing. And then if you have 30 or 35 years of it, it can be a wonderful, wonderful kind of deep relationship that would never be gotten to otherwise unless you had given up the right to live as you wanted and limited yourself to the other person. I think that's how it works with God, especially when you consider we don't just limit ourselves for God, but God actually made sacrifices for us. Only Christianity says that God became human, he went to the cross. So if I was giving to my wife and she never gave to me, it wouldn't work. If you give to God without having a God who actually is given to you, it wouldn't work. But in the Christian God, you've got somebody like that. You are great conversation partners, and I'm looking forward to the next time, which won't be too long. And thank you very much for being here and participating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.